Well, good morning, everyone. My name's Christine, and I've been in ICL since 2021. I'm here this morning to introduce Tom Branniger. Tom was born in Salem and grew up in McMinnville. He went to graduate school and studied archives and records management at Western Washington University, and then had his professional career as an archivist in the Dwight D. Eisenhower Library in Abilene, Kansas. Tom's main job was to organize the records of the administration so that historians and other researchers could have some sort of easy and rational access to them. He retired in 2008, and since 2008, he's had a very, very active quasi-career, I guess we could call it an avocation, out at the Polk County Historical Society in Rickreall as their archivist. Now, if you haven't visited that little museum out in Polk County, right in Rickreall, right by the fairgrounds, I really encourage you to do it. You may recall our speaker from Brunkhouse, who's also associated with the Polk County Historical Society. And I met Tom when I lived in Polk County and always found him to be a kind and generous and very, very interesting person. So let's give Tom a warm welcome. Come on, Tom.
Okay, well, thanks for that introduction. I'll try to live up to your generous comments. As she explained, I spent 31 years at the Eisenhower Library, where I became the staff expert on the Eisenhower family history. Shortly after I started working there, I stumbled across some new information about the business career of the president's father, David Eisenhower. This led to a major reinterpretation of the Eisenhower family history and helped clear up a number of mysteries regarding the president and his brothers. Now, I need to stress that all of this information was not sensitive or restricted. It was freely available for many years, but it was not at the Eisenhower Library, and historians had completely overlooked it. Of course, you're probably wondering, how can this be? Dwight D. Eisenhower was a national hero, Supreme Allied commander in Europe during World War II, President of the United States. Historians, journalists, biographers had spent decades researching his background. How could they have missed such important information? Well, that's the story I'm going to tell you today. It makes a great cautionary tale because it proves you can't believe everything you read in the history books. It also shows how important it is to use local history sources in your research. The type of stuff you'll find at places like the Willamette Heritage Center in Rickreall, here in Salem, or the Polk County Museum in Rickreall, which professional historians tend to overlook at their peril. This story begins almost 50 years ago in Bellingham, Washington. Let's go back to late summer of 1977. I was a struggling young graduate student at Western. I'd earned my master's degree in archives and records management, and I'd applied for jobs in a number of archives around the country. And one day I got a call from the Eisenhower Library saying they'd accepted my application. So I went running over to the college library to check everything I could find on Dwight D. Eisenhower. And being a genealogist, I'd paid close attention to his family background. Eisenhower was a German name. The family came to America in 1741 and settled in Pennsylvania. Then in 1878, the president's grandfather, Jacob Eisenhower, moved his family from Pennsylvania to Kansas. They settled in Dickinson County, which is the north central part of the state. Abilene is the county seat. I'm sure you've all heard of Abilene, the Wild West cattle trade town, gunfights in the streets, saloons, brothels. Wild Bill Hickok was the town marshal in 1871. But the cattle trade had ended, and the whole county went through a severe economic recession, and a bunch of farmland became cheaply available, which is why the Eisenhowers decided to settle there. And being farmers, they did not live in town. They settled way out on the prairie about 15 miles southeast of Abilene. I've got a little sketch map that shows how the county is laid out. I'm sorry I'm not able to put them up on the screen. This line through the middle is Interstate 70. Abilene is just south of the interstate. The Eisenhower farm was about halfway down, and the south part of the county was a little town called Hope, which will be very important to this story. Jacob was rather well-to-do. He had lots of land, lots of money, and lots of children. So when his children came of age, he gave them a bunch of land and a bunch of money to help set them up in farming. In addition to his son David, he had two children who are very important to the story. David had a brother, Abraham, who was a veterinarian and later became a minister. He also had an older sister, Amanda, who married a man named Christian Musser, and they farmed in the Abilene area. Now, the Mussers is going to be really important to this story, so keep them in mind. David, however, did not want to be a farmer. He had mechanical skills. He wanted to study engineering. He was born in 1863, so he would have been 15 years old. They moved to Kansas. In 1884, the year he turned 21, he took the money his father gave him and enrolled in the mechanical engineering course at Lane University, a small private college run by the United Brethren Church in Lecompton, which is in eastern Kansas. While he was there, he fell in love with a fellow student named Ida Stover. She was a year older than David, born in Virginia in 1862, and she was an orphan. After her parents died, she moved to Kansas to live with her older brother, William Stover, who was living in Lecompton. Well, they fell in love and got married, and they settled in Hope, where David ran a general merchandise store in partnership with a man named Milton Good. Well, the partnership was not a success. The partnership broke up, and in February 1892, the Eisenhower settled in Abilene, the county seat, where David got a job at the local creamery, maintaining the refrigeration equipment. So here we can see him putting his mechanical skills to good use. David and Ida spent the rest of their lives in Abilene, and that's where their sons grew up. They had 7 sons, one of whom died in infancy. The 2 oldest sons were born in Hope. The 4 youngest sons were born in Abilene. The 3rd son, Dwight D. Eisenhower himself, was born in Denison, Texas. So even before I moved to Kansas, I knew there's something strange about the president's birth. Instead of moving directly from Hope to Abilene, they'd gone to Texas for about 3 years. And the future president just happened to be born while they were living in Denison. Well, I started work in October at the Eisenhower Library, and my first assignment was to read all the standard biographies of Dwight D. Eisenhower to become familiar with his career. And that's when I discovered what the problem was. According to the standard account, the reason the partnership failed was because of Milton Good. It was claimed that Milton was a scoundrel. He had driven the store into bankruptcy through poor business practices. Then one morning, David woke up and found he had been abandoned. Milton gone sneaking off in the dead of night, taking with him the last remaining cash in the store. David was broke, and he was humiliated by being betrayed by his partner. So he decided to need to work in a hurry to feed his poor, starving family. So he went to Texas. This was in October 1888, and got a job on the railroad, maintaining the engines, putting his mechanical skills to use. However, Ida was pregnant with her 2nd son, Edgar, so she stayed in Hope during the winter. And then in February of 89, when Edgar was born, she went to Denison to join David. And that's why they spent 3 years down there. And the reason they moved back to Abilene, they missed Kansas. All their friends and relatives were in Dickinson County. So when the creamery position became available, Eisenhower's brother-in-law, Christian Musser, had invested in the creamery. And when the position opened up, he recruited David to come back to the county to take over the position. So the Mussers knew all about his financial problems and his stay in Texas. And this will be very important later on. Well, this was the story that was repeated by all the standard biographies. And since these were distinguished scholars who spent decades researching the Eisenhower family, I had no reason to doubt this account. Milton Good was the villain, and David Eisenhower was his innocent, trusting victim, and that's all there was to it. Then one day, everything changed. I started doing volunteer work for the County Historical Society, and one day I had to find an obituary for a lady who died in December 1892. Now, I need to point out that Kansas is the best state in the country for doing newspaper research. The State Historical Society in Topeka was founded in 1875 by a group of newspaper editors for the express purpose of collecting every newspaper ever published in Kansas. They have a nearly complete set of every Kansas newspaper from 1876 to the present day. The problem was, in the 1970s and 80s, when I was doing this research, the Historical Society was in an old building in downtown Topeka, right across the street from the state capitol. So if I went there during the week, I couldn't find a parking space because of all the state employees. And on the weekends, it was only open for 4 hours Saturday morning from 8 to 12, which meant I had to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning, which I hated to do, and drive 90 miles into Topeka just to spend a few hours looking at old newspapers. So I didn't do it very often. However, an alternative source was available in Abilene. The Abilene newspaper office had a set of back issues stored in their basement, and these dated back to the 1880s. The editor and publisher at this time was an old man named Henry Jameson. He was in his 70s and had been running the paper since 1955 and was a good friend of Dwight D. Eisenhower. He also had an interest in local history. So when he found out about my research for the Historical Society, he gave me permission to use the old newspapers down in the basement, which was also open from 8 to 12 Saturday mornings. So I was down there one Saturday morning looking for this obituary when I stumbled across an advertisement for a general store in Abilene. Now, usually most people don't pay attention to advertisements because they contain so little genealogical information. But this one seemed to leap off the page at me. This is the ad I saw, and look at the name of the store, M.D. Good and Company. It was the most incredible thing I've ever seen. Here was Milton Good, this dastardly villain who bankrupted the Hope store and absconded with the assets and was never seen again. But he was living in Abilene, running another store, advertising in the newspaper. And this was after the Eisenhowers come back from Texas, and they were also living in Abilene. In a little place like that, it seemed impossible. They could not have known he was there. So the instant I saw this ad, I knew the standard account that all the historians had been repeating could not be correct. So I decided to do some research to see if I could figure out what actually happened. So I spent the first part of my research drawing up a research strategy. It's always nice to have a strategy. This was in 3 parts. First, I have to go through all the Hope papers from the 1880s to find everything about the original partnership. Second, I have to go through all the Abilene papers from the 1890s to find everything I could about the Milton Good second store. And it would be an added bonus if I could find some evidence that he and David had interacted during that period, because that would be proof that David knew he was in Abilene. Third, I have to go through all the standard biographies and check their accounts of the store, find out why were they repeating the story when it's obviously not correct. Well, the third part was the easiest because all the biographies were right there at the Eisenhower Library. I could check them at my leisure. When I got to checking their accounts of the store, I made a very interesting discovery. And I'll tell you what it was in a few minutes, so stay tuned. The second part was easy at first. Remember I said Henry Jameson was supporting my research? In October 1986, he dropped dead of a heart attack. The business manager, a grumpy, suspicious lady named Vivian Sadowski, got control of the newspaper. The first thing she did was close the old newspapers to research. I figured that added about 3 years to my work, cost me hundreds of dollars in travel expenses, having to run into Topeka to finish going through the old newspapers. So I'm not too enamored of the Abilene newspaper office. This is an important lesson for historians. Just because something is available today does not necessarily mean it will be available tomorrow. So anyway, the first part was the hardest, because I thought at first that the Hope papers might still exist in Dickinson County. So I did some checking in Hope, and it turned out the newspaper office had burned down in 1958, and all the back issues were destroyed. So I was stuck by using the duplicate set of the State Historical Society. So when I went through all the Hope papers, I got some very useful information about Milton Good and their relationship. First of all, we know a lot about David's personality. He died in March of 42 before Dwight became very famous. But historians spent a lot of time interviewing their friends and neighbors who had known the family. And they all agree that David was not a very pleasant person. For one thing, he had a violent temper. He also inflicted all the corporal punishment on his sons. Dwight D. Eisenhower himself tells of one incident in his memoirs where his brother Edgar began leaving school early in order to earn spending money at a part-time job. When Edgar learned about this, he became enraged and began whipping Edgar with a leather strap. Edgar was rescued by a tearful Dwight, who told his father that not even a dog should receive such a beating. We also know that David could be petty and vindictive and loved to cherish a grudge. There's a famous story about his early years in Abilene. He went to a local store and opened a charge account, but he made an agreement with the store owner. He would go in at the end of each month and pay what he owed, but he did not want the store to send him a bill. Well, this worked out for a while, but then the store hired a new clerk who was not familiar with the arrangement. David went to the store and paid the bill, and he would never go in that store again. So he does not come across being a very pleasant person. Now, the Hope papers from the 1880s give a lot of information about Milton Good. He was the exact opposite of David. He was cheerful, outgoing, socially active. He was a kind of community booster, participating in all projects that would build up Hope. And I found 2 instances in the papers where Milton Good got involved with something and then David Eisenhower kind of followed in after him, which must have been very irritating to David. On one occasion, Hope built an opera house, and Milton Good arranged to get a drop curtain for the stage. Once he had raised the money, he ordered it and was sent to Abilene by mistake instead of to Hope, which is half a day's journey by horse and buggy. Guess who had to go to Abilene and pick it up? David Eisenhower. On another occasion, a bunch of business leaders in Hope got together and created a community development fund, which would provide loans to businesses to help them get started in Hope. Milton Good was one of the advertisers. He was so enthusiastic about the project that he pledged $1,000 to help it get started. This is one of the largest pledges ever received by that community fund. When it came to a few weeks later to pay the money, Milton only paid $500. Guess who paid the rest? David Eisenhower. So there's plenty of personality conflicts. And so this resulted in the partnership only lasting from a year and a half. In November of 1886, David published a notice in the newspaper saying that I have this day bought all the interest in the late firm of Good and Eisenhower, thereby relinquishing Milton Good from all responsibilities of the late firm. This shows that it was not an abandonment. David had purchased Milton's share of the business. And in fact, Milton didn't even go running off at night to disappear. He had married a woman named Anne Gleisner, who was from a very prominent Abilene family. Her brother, John Gleisner, ran a pharmacy in Abilene for many years. John's daughter, Helen Gleisner, married Ernest Morris, who was president of one of the banks in Abilene. So she had a lot of important connections in the Abilene area. And they were expecting a baby. So they stayed in Hope for almost a month after the partnership broke up. And then they had a daughter named Rose. And after Rose was born, they moved back to Abilene, and Milton got a job as a store clerk in one of the other stores in Abilene. So instead of running off and never being seen again, he stayed right there in Dickinson County. And remember, I said David had moved to Denison in October 1888. This is almost 2 years after the partnership broke up. What was he doing in the meantime? He was running the store. It did not go out of business. He brought in his brother Abraham as his business partner. The store was renamed Eisenhower Brothers. Abraham opened one of his veterinarian clinics in the corner of the store building. They also rented out part of the building to other businesses in Hope. And by following the ads in these other businesses, you can see that there's a very high turnover in tenants at the store. This seemed to suggest that David was not a very congenial landlord. And I actually uncovered evidence that this was the case. One of the tenants was a man named E.A. Gehrig, who ran a bakery. After he'd been in the Eisenhower store for a while, he wanted to expand his business. So he went to a larger building elsewhere in Hope. Shortly after he did this, he began to have financial problems. One day, his creditors swooped down on his bakery and seized part of his stock to satisfy their claims. Well, this did not affect his entire business. He stayed open for business at his usual location. However, rumors began to circulate in Hope. It was claimed that he'd been forced into bankruptcy and his store had been closed. He knew the source of the rumors. He had to publish a notice in the paper saying he was still open for business. This is what he said. The report that I have enclosed was given circulation by David Eisenhower, whose malice toward me, because I lately removed from his building, is a matter of general knowledge. So here we have evidence that David was circulating nasty stories about one of his business rivals in Hope. As soon as I saw this, I began to realize maybe historians have things backwards. Milton Good is really an honorable, reliable businessman, and the reason everybody thinks he was the villain is because David Eisenhower was circulating nasty stories about him. Well, David eventually lost interest in running the store. There was a little notice in the paper saying he'd gone to Kansas City in search of a new location, but decided to stay in Hope for a while. Then in October 1888, published a little notice in the paper saying that he had gone to Denison, Texas, where he had gotten a job on the railroads. So this was 2 years after the partnership broke up. And you might assume he left the town because the store had gone out of business. But that was not the case. It was still in operation. After he left town, his brother Abraham had to sell the store for him. They sold it to Shockey and Snyder, which was a department store in Abilene. The Eisenhower building became their Hope subsidiary. So nothing about the store in the standard account is true. David had purchased Milton's share of the business and ran it for another 2 years. Then he abandoned his partner and went running off to Texas, and his family had to dispose of the store for him. So none of this was true. None of the original account was true. So now it's time to tell you what I found in the Abilene papers. Milton Good opened a second store in the fall of 1892, and this was the worst possible time to start a new business. The country was heading into a severe economic depression called the Panic of 1893. In the spring of 1893, Milton's store failed and he went bankrupt. Now, you might assume that he did what the Eisenhowers later claimed, go running off in the dead of night and abandon his creditors. That's not what happened. He stayed right there in Abilene. He got a job as a traveling salesman to support his family and continued to raise money to help pay off his creditors. Then in 1896, I found a really interesting article in the Abilene paper. Behold, David Eisenhower's arrest record. He got arrested for beating one of the children who lived in his neighborhood. He was put in the Abilene City Jail, had to pay a fine to get out. So here we have more evidence of his unpleasant personality. Then in the 1898 papers, there was a really interesting article about Milton's financial trouble. A little bankruptcy notice. He filed for bankruptcy under the new law. And it said he was one of the first people to do so, and it gave a list of his creditors, and one of them was David Eisenhower. Documentary proof that they knew he was in Abilene, was having financial dealings with him 12 years after the partnership broke up. So I knew that if I could find his bankruptcy file, I might have a copy of David's claim that would give me useful information. Well, I knew from my archival training that this was the federal bankruptcy law of 1898. This meant his case file had to be part of the records of the U.S. District Courts for the District of Kansas, and those records were stored at the National Archives branch in Kansas City, Missouri. So I took a couple of these off and went to Kansas City and dug up Milton's case file, and there was David Eisenhower's claim. And he says that Milton owed him money because he had won a lawsuit against Milton in the District Court of Dickinson County. This meant there had to be a case file at the courthouse in Abilene for the lawsuit of Eisenhower versus Good. I was so disgusted with myself when I saw this. All the standard biographies claimed that there had never been a lawsuit filed because the Eisenhowers did not know where Milton Good had gone. So I never thought of going to the courthouse to see if this was actually true. And apparently nobody else had done so either. So I went running back to Abilene as fast as I could go, and I stopped at the courthouse and dug up Eisenhower versus Good. Here's David's claim against Milton Good. And he says that Milton owed him money because he had won a lawsuit against Milton before the Justice of the Peace and Hope in January of 1887. This was just 2 months after the partnership broke up, and 1 month after Milton left Hope and gone back to Abilene. So it seemed like this had something to do with the breakup of the partnership. So I thought, well, if I could find the Justice of the Peace records, I might contain a clue on the breakup of the partnership. So I did some checking at Hope. Turned out the Justice of the Peace had also been editor of the newspaper. And when the newspaper office burned down, there went all the old Justice of the Peace records. So I can't prove it, but I'm pretty sure this had something to do with the breakup of the partnership. And it also shows how petty and vindictive David could be. Milton owed him some money and spent the next 12 years pursuing Milton through the courts, even after Milton had gone bankrupt and struggling to support his family. Well, now it's time to tell you what I found when I went through all these standard biographies and found out to check where they got this information. Well, it turns out nobody had done any original research on the store. If they mentioned it at all, they merely cited earlier writers who cited earlier writers. So the whole story of Milton Good's misdeeds boils down to two basic sources. One source is Dwight D. Eisenhower himself. After he left the White House, he spent the rest of his life writing his memoirs. In 1963 and 65, he came out with two big fat volumes on his 2 terms as president. Then in 1967, he published a book titled At Ease, Stories I Tell to Friends, in which he tells about his family background, his childhood, and his early military career. And in the early part where he tells about his family background, he included the story of how David had been betrayed by his business partner and had to go to Denison, Texas to find work. Well, you might assume that Eisenhower knew everything about this, and that's why historians have been citing this most favorably. But I'll tell you something surprising. Eisenhower knew nothing about the store, and he did not write that in his memoirs. It might be surprising because right there in the book with his name on the cover, but it's true. And I'll explain why in a few minutes, so stay tuned. The other source is a book titled Soldier of Democracy by Kenneth Davis. Now, you may have heard of Kenneth Davis. He was a famous biographer. He wrote books about a number of famous Americans, including a multi-volume set on Franklin D. Roosevelt. And all these books are very well written and thoroughly researched. But Soldier of Democracy, his biography of Dwight D. Eisenhower, is a little bit different than the others. It was his first major biography. It came out right at the end of World War II when he was still fairly young and inexperienced. And there's a great story in how he came to write this book. Dwight D. Eisenhower first became famous in the summer of 1942 when he became was appointed to command the invasion of North Africa. The country was agog at the news. Here was this unknown army officer who appeared out of nowhere to command this mighty invasion force. Everybody wanted to know about him. So a number of journalists rushed into print with biographical information. This is mostly articles and magazine articles and newspaper articles about Eisenhower. There are also a couple of books published during this early period by Alden Hatch and Francis Miller. And all these books were written in a hurry to satisfy the popular demand. And so as a result, you might expect it was very sloppy research, poorly edited, full of mistakes. Well, all this stuff was coming out during the early years of World War II. And the Eisenhower family was not happy about this. Then in the summer of 1943, the youngest Eisenhower brother, Milton, became president of Kansas State University. This is in Manhattan, which is about 45 miles from Abilene. And this worked out very well for the family. David had died the previous year, but Ida was still living in the old family home in Abilene. She was getting frail and forgetful, needed help, so with Milton close at hand, he could keep an eye on her and help manage her affairs. Kenneth Davis was a young journalist on the university staff. He was helping to edit university publications, but he had dreams of becoming something more. He wanted to become a famous biographer, writing magisterial books about famous Americans. Suddenly, here was this new college president. He had an older brother who was a national hero, and the family was from a little town just up the road a ways. It seemed like the perfect opportunity. So Davis approached President Eisenhower, that's Milton, the college president, and suggested he be allowed to write an authorized biography of the support of the Eisenhower family. And Milton thought this was a good idea for a couple of reasons. For one thing, Davis was one of his staff, so he could keep an eye on the guy, make sure he didn't screw up too badly. For another thing, an authorized biography was sure to become a runaway bestseller, and this would bring great credit to Kansas State University. So once all the brothers had approved, he wrote to his brothers and asked about this. He sent Davis to Abilene and arranged for introductions to all their friends and neighbors who knew the family. So Davis got a lot of these stories about what an unpleasant person David Eisenhower was. However, they only had known the Eisenhowers since they settled in Kansas, in Abilene in 1892. For the earlier history on the family, he had to turn to members of the Eisenhower family. Well, by this time, Ida was very frail and forgetful, and she was no help at all. But the Mussers were still alive and living in Abilene. They were over 80 at this time, and so, but still active and alert. So he spent considerable time interviewing Kristen and Amanda Musser. And we know about this because he says right there in Soldier of Democracy that he was their main source. And Amanda called David her favorite brother. So if we look at this from the Master's point of view, we can see what happened. David for years has been spouting all these nasty stories about Milton Good. However, all of a sudden here came this young, naive, trusting journalist who was snooping around and asking questions. And Amanda knew that if she told the truth about the store, she would reveal her favorite brother as a liar and a business failure. So she probably found it a lot easier to just repeat the same stories that David had been telling for decades. And Milton Good, being young and naive and in a hurry, just swallowed the whole thing hook, line, and sinker, and never bothered to check on the truth of these stories. So all this got copied into those early chapters of Soldier of Democracy. And so, as expected, it became a runaway bestseller when it was published in 1945. Since it was an authorized biography, it became standard use by all the later historians. They would just quote stuff out of that book and accept its gospel truth without doing the research to see if it was actually correct or not. Well, now it's time to tell about Dwight D. Eisenhower's memoirs. You know, I said he knew nothing about his family history. In fact, when you come right down to it, he knew almost nothing about his own personal background. I can give you two examples that illustrate this very well. Remember, I said he was born in Denison, Texas. Well, in the 1920s, when he went overseas, he had to get a passport. When he applied for the passport, he said he was born in Tyler, Texas, a small town several miles from Denison. That passport's on display in the Eisenhower Museum in Abilene. Every once in a while, a tourist will notice that. They'll ask, why did he say he was born in Tyler when he was really born in Denison? And we have to write back and say, well, he just didn't know. In fact, when Ike first became famous during World War II, still a few old-timers left in Denison that remembered the family. They pointed out the house where the family lived, the exact room where Dwight D. Eisenhower had been born. The town was very excited to think they had a genuine national hero as native son. So when they heard it was claiming Tyler as a birthplace, you can imagine how upset they got. So the town organized a committee to investigate the matter. The committee contacted Eisenhower's mother, who was still living in Abilene. She confirmed, yes, indeed, he had been born in Denison. Once they knew they had the right place, they raised enough money to buy the property. It's now a Texas state park and a National Historic Site. I've got a great newspaper article here that tells all about the committee's research. But it seems odd that Ike's parents let him go over 50 years, more than half his life, thinking he was born in the wrong town. I find this very suspicious. It's almost like they're saying, don't ask about your background. There's stuff we don't want you to find out. Very curious. Anyway, that's the first example. Second example involves Eisenhower's given name. When he was born, he was named David Dwight Eisenhower. In the family Bible, where the birth is recorded, it's listed as D. Dwight. That Bible's on display in the family home in Abilene. Every once in a while, a tourist will notice that. They'll ask, why did he change his name around? When did he do it? Well, when I first started working in the library in 1977, we didn't know. We never found any documents that would explain when or why he had done it. However, in the mid-1980s, we began to process his post-presidential papers, and a very interesting letter turned up. Somebody wrote to Eisenhower and asked him about his name. In his response, he explains what happened. It's a very revealing document. Allow me to quote. This says, the reversion took place when I went into West Point. This had been in the summer of 1911 when he was 20 years old, not quite 21. He says, having been called Dwight by my mother my entire boyhood, I just assumed my name is Dwight David. Since I had thus entered it into the official records, I've continued to use this order. Now, I think this is an absolutely damning piece of evidence. The President of the United States admitting in writing that he did not know his first name is David. Since everyone called him Dwight while he was growing up, he really assumed that was his first name. By the time he found out differently, he'd been entered in all the official military records. So he just kept on using it. Well, now what does all this tell us about Dwight D. Eisenhower? He did not know where he was born. He didn't even know what his proper name was. His parents let him wallow in ignorance, making the same mistakes year after year. It's clear he was being raised in the same atmosphere of secrecy and suppression that afflicted all of his brothers' lives. And yet this is the man historians are trusting for intimate details of his ancestors' lives. This raises a very important question, which historians have never addressed, another mystery, if you will. If Eisenhower knew so little about his background, where did he get all this wonderful information he put in his memoirs? There's a whole chapter in At Ease about his family history, the lives of his distant ancestors, including the story about Milton Good's villainy, stuff he knew nothing about. So where did this information come from? Well, I wondered the same thing until one day the Eisenhower Library acquired the papers of Kevin McCann. There's a great story here about Kevin McCann. He's one of those obscure people who happens to be in the right place at the right time to cause historians a lot of problems. McCann was a journalist in Illinois in the 1930s. When World War II came along, he got into the Army. When the Army found out what a good writer he was, they signed him to the War Department in Washington, where he spent the last part of the war writing speeches and press releases of the top Army brass. So at the end of the war, when Eisenhower came back from Europe to become Chief of Staff of the Army, here was Kevin McCann in his office helping to draft his speeches. And Eisenhower, who was a very good writer himself, was quite impressed by McCann's work. So he kind of took McCann under his wing. In 1948, when Eisenhower went to New York City to become president of Columbia University, he needed someone to help him draft his speeches and messages. He took Kevin McCann with him. After Eisenhower became president and needed someone at the White House to help him draft his speeches and messages, he called in Kevin McCann. After Eisenhower retired to Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, and needed help writing his memoirs, who did he call? All together now, come on. Kevin McCann. All right, audience participation. It's nice to know I haven't put you all to sleep yet. Actually, I had a chance to meet McCann once. He came to the Eisenhower Library to check his old White House files. This was about, I think, late 1979, just a couple of years after I joined the staff. I remember him well. He was a tall, very thin man with gray hair. He had a deep foghorn voice that echoed down the hallways. And he loved beer. One of the supervisors took him out to lunch. In the course of a short meal, McCann went through an entire six-pack of beer. Then he spent half the afternoon running up and down the hallway past my office to the bathroom. We didn't realize at the time the reason he was so thin is because he had cancer and was wasting away. He died in February 1981. And after he died, we got a call from his wife. She said, come and pick up Kevin's papers. They're getting in the way. So a couple of the supervisors got a van and drove all the way down to Phoenix, Arizona, where the McCanns were living. Spent a whole day hauling stuff out of the house. The place was a mess. McCann had no filing system at all. He was just tossed up where there was an empty spot. The supervisors took all this stuff back to the Eisenhower Library. tossed it on the floor in the storage area. Made a big stack of boxes about this high. Then the supervisory archivist came to me. He said, Tom, you're the best organized person on the staff. Organize that. I said, yes, sir. Most people have seen it as a pile of junk. I saw it as a professional challenge. It took me over 3 months going through folder by folder trying to work out an arrangement scheme. When I got to checking all this neat stuff that had come from the McCanns, lo and behold, here were several boxes of rough drafts of at ease from Gettysburg. Turned out that since Eisenhower knew nothing about his ancestors, he had Kevin McCann prepare the rough draft of that chapter for him. And since McCann was not a member of the family, knew nothing about Eisenhower's ancestors, he had to do some research. Now, there's one little problem when you're working in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, and all the records are in Kansas. You can't just go running up to the courthouse or the archives when you need to check a fact. To make matters worse, McCann was in a hurry. Eisenhower was an old man. His health was starting to fail. He had a heart attack in 1965 while working on the book. He had gallbladder surgery while working on the book, so he could drop dead in any instant. All of McCann's work would be wasted. So McCann dared not spend a lot of time doing research of the book. Especially, it was in an area that had been thoroughly covered by previous writers. So what did McCann do? Well, as the prefect in Newman Casablanca might have said, round up the usual sources, namely Kenneth Davis, the naive, trusting, inexperienced young journalist who swallowed hook, line, and sinker all the tall tales he collected in the course of his work. So it's easy to see what McCann did. While drafting the chapters on the Eisenhower's family background, he had gone through the courthouse in Abilene or the Historical Society newspapers, which had told him the real story. No, Kevin McCann stayed in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, and copied right out of Kenneth Davis's book. So this is something you always need to ask yourself when using somebody's memoirs. You need to ask, does this guy know what he's talking about? Did he actually write this himself, or did he use a ghostwriter who screwed things up? If he did write it himself, and he's talking about things that happened before he was born, how did he find out about them? Were his sources accurate and unbiased? The nice thing about Eisenhower, when he's talking about events where he was physically present and witnessed what was happening, is a fairly reliable reporter. The sections of his memoirs that cover his family background should not be considered a primary source. It's not even a secondary source. It's a tertiary source. The most sensational myths and legends copied without attribution from some of the most unreliable secondary sources. So I will make a prediction. I venture to predict that once the historians get their act together, start checking some of the tall tales that Kevin McCann copied into those early chapters of At Ease, more and more mistakes are going to be found. I pointed the way with my research on Milton Good. I wrote it up in the form of an article. It was published in the autumn 1992 issue of Kansas History. It's now available online at the Kansas State Historical Society website, in case any of you are interested in reading it yourself. But there's still a lot of research that needs to be done on the Eisenhower family background. I think I might have a couple more minutes. So I'll wind up my talk by telling one final story about how I discovered another mistake in At Ease. This will show how easy it is to document one specific fact. But I warn you, this story has a sad ending, a very sad ending. Sniff. This happened during the Eisenhower Centennial in 1990. A journalist called the library, wanted to know where the president's parents had been married. We told him Lecompton, Kansas. Oh no, that wasn't good enough. He wanted the exact building in Lecompton where the wedding took place. Well, if you look at Ease, Ike's memoirs, he says his parents were married in the college chapel. You might assume that Ike knew what he was talking about, but this is the early part of the book that was actually drafted by Kevin McCann based on unreliable secondary sources. So right away I began to get suspicious. I was thinking this might be another tall tale that can't be trusted. So I checked some of the other standard biographies and discovered the same thing I found when I was researching Milton Good. Nobody had done any original work on the wedding. If they mentioned it at all, they merely cited earlier writers, who cited earlier writers. So the whole thing boils down to Kenneth Davis. What does Kenneth Davis say? Well, if you look at Soldiers of Democracy, you'll see his writing is very vague. He says they were students of the college and they fell in love and got married and went to Hope to run the store. And oh, by the way, they were married in the college chapel. So he mentions it only in passing like it's no big deal. And some later writers seem to have more than this than he actually says. But I knew from my research on Milton Good, none of this was true. Kenneth Davis and the other writers totally mess up the sequence of events. The wedding was in September 1885. The stores opened at the end of March, over 5 months before the wedding. David actually dropped out of college halfway through the school year in order to start work on the store. I had finished out the school year and was living with her brother William at his house in Lecompton, waiting for David to come and claim her. So instead of being students in good standing, they were no longer attending the college, and David was actually a dropout. Would the religious fanatics who ran the school have allowed them to use the chapel under these conditions? I doubted it very much. So red warning flags are going up, sirens were screaming, don't trust this, don't trust this. I finally got smart. And so maybe I can find a newspaper account of the wedding. This would be a contemporary source based on information provided by people who were actually there. It would be more reliable than all these myths and legends that Kenneth Davis had dredged up half a century later. Well, the State Historical Society published a guide to the newspaper collection. I checked the guide. By God, there was a newspaper in Lecompton in 1885. Now, what we should have done, we should have told the journalist, well, the Eisenhowers didn't keep a record, but if you check the old Lecompton papers, they might have an article about the wedding. They'll tell you what you want to know. That would have been our standard response. If we don't have something at the Eisenhower Library, we try to refer people to an archive that does have the information. I actually drafted a letter to this effect. One little problem, all the outgoing letters at this time had to be approved by the assistant director, Mac Teasley. Mac was a rather indecisive type person. Usually you'd just sign off on the letters and not pay much attention to what was happening. Not this time, however. This time Mac did something very unusual. He made a decision. He overruled me. He said, well, normally we don't do this type of research for people, but the question might come up again. It would be nice to have the information on hand. So in this one case, we'll do this guy's research for him. I thought, well, this guy can get all sorts of special favors. He'll be really grateful when we solve this mystery for him. So Mac called one of his friends at the State Historical Society. They checked the old Lecompton papers, found an article about the wedding, and sent us a copy. Ta-da! Nice long article. It says the wedding took place at William Stover's house. Ida's brother, where she was living at the time. Well, this made perfect sense. But better sense in using the chapel of the college when they were no longer students. So I drafted another letter to the journalist saying the wedding was at the Stovers. And as evidence, I enclosed a copy of the newspaper article. This time it got approved and often went in the mail. Well, you might assume this would be the end of the story. The journalist would say, wow, I've got new information nobody else knows about. It would have broadcasted to the world. Historians would have blessed his name forever for clearing up the matter, even though somebody else had done most of his work for him. But that's not what happened. And this is where the sad part comes in. See, it had taken me a couple days to do my search, and the Historical Society a couple days to do their search, a couple more days for my new letter to be drafted and typed and sent off in the mail, which means by the time he got my response, over a week had gone by since his inquiry. During that time, he got so impatient waiting for an answer, he decided to do a little research of his own. But what did he do? He checked at ease. So when he got my letter saying the wedding was at the Stovers, he became very upset. He called the library on the phone and accused me of misleading him. He said, I would much rather believe the President of the United States instead of a bunch of dusty old newspaper clippings. And I thought to myself, what a moron. But that's the type of stuff you have to put up with when you're an archivist. You have to deal with people who don't know how to do research and are not familiar with the sources and don't want to listen or to try to point them in the right direction, which is why I was so eager to retire and become a hermit. But there you are. Anyway, I hope I didn't bore you too much with all these stories. Any questions? Thank you.
Hello, my name's Mark. You gave me quite an appreciation about how it's not just the president's documents that historians follow, but also everyone in their orbit.
Yeah.
How many historians did you have working with you at the Eisenhower?
There were, I think, 5 or 6 people on the archive staff. There were 3 or 4 technicians and 3 or 4 archivists. And there was constant fluctuation because we went through a severe period of no hiring, so gradual attrition. When I left, there were, I think, 4 archivists left.
Hi, my name is Lillian, and I do know where some artifacts from Dwight Eisenhower are located, and I wanted to ask Neil if I should encourage my daughter to do a historic preservation on his bathtub and sink. My daughter lives in La Quinta, and the person that built the house that they bought and moved into had demolished the Eisenhower house. So when I go there to stay in the guest bedroom, I can take a bath in a robin blue egg, bathtub and sink that came out of the Eisenhower's house.
Which house was that?
Well, wherever they were in like Palm Desert or Palm Springs, their last house.
Okay, that was Eisenhower went to California during the winter. He wrote some of his memoirs down there.
Right. Wherever they were there in the desert in California, when the house was demolished, the contractor he couldn't get the toilet because obviously they crack when you try to remove a toilet. But he took the two pieces and put them in the new house he was building. They ended up buying that house.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah, isn't it?
Yep.
This is Janet. I just wanted to point out two things for Polk County voters. There's a bond measure that will be on the ballot May 20th for the Polk County Fairgrounds Museum. Is that correct?
It's just for the fairgrounds. We're separate from the fairgrounds, and we don't get any county money at all.
Okay.
It's all volunteer.
Okay. So that doesn't affect the museum?
No.
And there's also in Independence a city historic museum that
Yep.
is scheduled for maybe not getting funding from the city anymore, and it's a real nice, small, very interesting, well-done museum just close to downtown Independence.
Yeah, that's what happens when you rely on government funding. They cut off the funding, then you have to close the museum. That's why I prefer the Polk County Museum, because it just relies on donations and grants.
I'm Neil, and thank you for your presentation. You led me to have further appreciation for the historian who assisted me on my projects, that I didn't have to chase the historical facts. I could focus on the architecture.
Sure.
Coming across the river.
Yeah.